Hello, everyone, and welcome to a World Crypto Network beta show special. This is the suggestion of Jamie Nelson, who wanted to try out a new show format for this time of day every Tuesday, and so I thought I'd come along and offer my support. So, Jamie, what do you got for us?
Well, I've been thinking about this, and a lot of times when you start a new show, it's very difficult to get going because it's a lot of work to do all by yourself and to get people to come on, and it's just a lot of stress. And I thought, well, we've had some experience now. You know, you and I are regulars, and we have some other people that come on all the time. And I thought we could have a show every Tuesday at this time slot. And
Hmm.
then people that wanted to start their own show or had ideas for a show that they wanted to try out, we could let them kind of take over this time slot and be here to support them.
That's a very good idea.
And then, it would be you know, since you have a hard time doing something all by yourself on a live broadcast, and you're always worried about dead air, or if you have technical difficulties or whatever. Like right before this show, I was having audio problems, and it just gets very frustrating. And if you get confused on where you're at or lose your place on your agenda or whatever, if you have a backup host to just kind of say, okay, I'll just start talking and you can just catch up and figure out where
That's
you
it.
were at.
That's exactly it. The hardest part is just starting. And I remember when I didn't do this cold. I had Tom who helped me originally, and it's stressful. Running one of these things is stressful. You've got a lot to think about. And what tends to happen before the show is, and I see Tom do this and I do this, is you tend to put it off, right? Because you're not sure, have I got everything ready? And I find the best thing, it's like jumping out of an airplane. If you've ever done it, you always have to jump with conviction. Because if you hesitate, you sabotage the fall. So if you just do it, even though it's like, oh, okay, I've got to think about things, then it actually goes a lot better than if you try and spend more time, because there'll always be something that will go wrong. There'll always be a window that you didn't have open, or you'll have something open in the background, and that will kind of, niggle. So I think it's absolutely fantastic that you've done this, Jamie, and I'm here to support you just as people were there to support me. And I think it's really about giving the help to other people that perhaps you wish you'd had, or maybe you did get from other people, rather than just looking after yourself. So let's you've got me up on your screen share there. Let's get this Charlie Shrem story you were mentioning to me.
Well, let's introduce John. He's here
Oh yeah.
with us and I'm having some camera problems here now. My
I've
Windows 8.
switched over to Ajan. Hello, Ajan. How you doing? How is Thailand?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Quick question: How long have you been doing these shows, Chris?
So I first started back in sort of late November, early December, and I started doing interviews with other people, but I didn't start doing this properly until February.
And how many shows do you think you've done so far, approximately?
I'd say getting on for maybe 50, 60, something like that.
Oh, okay. No, and how long do you think? How many shows do you think you sort of need to get comfortable?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd say at least a dozen times. Like you don't stop getting nervous straight away. Like it takes a little while. Like when I was doing the Bitcoin group the other day, it was the first time I'd done a scripted format. And so I was kind of stressing out then. But if it's Chris before coffee, I'm kind of loose and free, because a lot of what people don't realize is that in order to get the kind of insights that people enjoy from these sorts of shows, you spend a lot of time pacing up and down, maybe bathroom time. Like I like to do it in the bathroom when I pace up and down and I rehearse scripts in my head. But then it just becomes like lyric poetry. Then when you go on air, you just tend to just riff and roll. So I know the material for Chris Before Coffee, whereas something like the Bitcoin group, because Tom likes to do it scripted, that can be quite nerve-wracking, because if you lose your place on the script, or you've got a second screen and something goes wrong, like Jamie is saying, you get dead air, and then it kind of stresses you out. So Jamie, I think right now the problem you've got is a problem we've had before, where when you share the screen, it just shares the whole screen. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm having a problem with. I shared my screen and now I can't get my face or my camera back. And I know other people have been having this problem, and it's a Google Hangouts problem. But I'm gonna not focus on that and just skip ahead and talk about if I can find where
I
that.
can I can bring up the Charlie Shrem story if you want. Here you go.
Well, I was going to bring up this puzzle I saw this morning on the solve bit puzzle. Can you see that on your screen now?
No, I can't at the moment.
Let me try and share it again.
Okay, I pulled it up here. So is this something Amir Tarki has done? Oh, there you
I'm
go. You
not
got it.
I'm not quite sure who actually did this. I just saw the link for Coin Artist shared it out again, and I went to it and looked at it. It says Amir's Glen, but I'm not sure who is actually sponsoring it.
And so this is one of these kind of real life puzzles where you have to take some clues. By the looks of it, there's some clues on that screen. And then there's presumably a bounty in that address there in the top left-hand corner. Let's see what that is.
Oh, you
So,
could click on that address.
well, it's like $5. So I don't know if that's supposed to be a donation address. Portal locked, waiting. What happens if I click on that? Just says begin. Oh, hang on, we've got a whole thing under here.
Oh, I never noticed the stuff
Right,
underneath.
I didn't notice it either. So maybe that's part of the trick. Maybe it's deliberately like that so that you can't really guess what it is.
But yeah, I these puzzles and the one Coin Artist did before with the pic or the portrait of Amir and Cody was, I still don't understand it. It was so complicated, and it was just it was a brilliant puzzle, but it had so many layers to it and stuff that you know I read on how it was solved, but it was just mind-boggling. There's
Yeah, so this is it here. And so inside of this picture there are clues. So people were going through and typing out these letters, and then there was a Bitcoin talk thread where you could go, and then she would kind of help you along a little bit. She'd drop some more clues in there, and then there was actually a bounty. There was some money that was involved where you could, get some Bitcoins out.
Yeah, and I don't remember and then I think she had an address too where some people were donating to increase the
Yes,
bounty.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah, so it becomes a self-perpetuating, a virtuous spiral where more people donate to it, and then as people donate to it, the bounty gets higher. And so it's like, because the thing is, a lot of these cryptographic puzzles are really, really difficult, and it takes a lot of time, and your time obviously is valuable. You're never getting that back. And so what happens is that as the puzzle seems to be too difficult for the people that are trying to solve it, more people start adding to the bounty to make it more worthwhile. So it's got these really interesting feedback loops built in.
Yeah, and so when I see these puzzles come out, I just think I like to bring awareness to them, and it really brings the art aspect of that's involved with Bitcoin and brings the cryptography aspect along with the creativity and just kind of it brings so many different aspects into this that make it so much more interesting than just a financial um, institution or something.
Yeah, because what people don't understand about Bitcoin, they still think of it as currency, and they're still not thinking about it in terms of what it actually does, which is solves the Byzantine generals problem. It solves the problem of how do you get a group of people to agree on events over distances. right? Even though they're not there, even though they're not there to witness them, how can you guarantee that everyone will agree on what happened over there, even though you weren't there to see it yourself? And so it was a wonderful piece of incentive engineering. But unfortunately, what's happened over the last few years is that people got bewitched by the money, and they just wanted the price to go up, and they confused marketing with education. And that's the problem. Marketing is a very different form of communication to education. When I educate someone, I don't care what that person does with the information. When I market to someone, I'm specifically giving you some information because I want you to perform an action in the future, preferably buy my products, right? And that's because I put in all kinds of upfront costs into sourcing that product. I've got all kinds of supply side incentives going on. I need to recover those costs, break even, and make a profit. But education is a much more, well, you're not interested at all. You're uninterested. And you try not to give people information in an attempt to manipulate their behavior. I mean, actually, the one outcome you want as a teacher, of course, is to inspire your student to learn for themselves so that they don't need you anymore as a teacher. They can move on and start teaching other people. So this is...
That's kind of what we've been seeing too with the government school systems. Is schooling is more of a indoctrination now than an education, where they're telling children what to think and not how to think.
That's right. That's absolutely right, and it's because it's a throwback to the industrial age. You know, that's the problem with it. Is that the only reason you were taught to read and write, particularly in the British Victorian era, was so that you could give your boss, who had the monopoly on the means of production, feedback on the machinery, right? The boss couldn't be there to operate the machinery at all times, so you had to be. And the only reason why you were taught to read and write was so that you could tell him when it broke down.
Yeah, because they wanted, during the Industrial Revolution or right before it, there were these very wealthy men that were politically influential that wanted to change a nation or a world of farmers into a world of obedient people that could sit in a factory for 10 to 16 hours a day and take orders. Because, you know, the people, and I grew up in a farming community, so I know how different it is going from working in the fields, and you know, you have a project that you need to get done, but you don't have to just sit and toil at a machine all day, and you're inside and you have no windows and stuff in a factory. Whereas, you know, when you're outside, it's more of a freedom type experience you feel. So you have to, or what they did was they just kind of shifted the people and the children into an education system or a schooling system that pretty much trained them in to be obedient, to sit there for that time and work for them.
Yeah, that's right.
And Edward Bernays, he was a master, and a lot of this can be traced back to the propaganda and stuff that started with him, and if you ever look him up.
And so one of the great things about these puzzles is that they now bring a kind of a game dynamic to the learning process, where now there's a small incentive for you to go about and actually learn. Some people learn passively just by listening to someone else, but more people tend to learn by doing. So it's a form of what's called inductive learning, where just by the practice of trying to solve a puzzle. And one of the interesting things is the way monetary rewards dampen what's called intrinsic motivation. There's actually a guy, an author called Daniel Pink, you need to look him up, and he's written extensively about this, about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivators. And it turns out that if you're doing a manual labor job and you're moving things around, you're more likely to be incentivized by extrinsic motivators like money. But if you're doing a creative task or something that's more cognitive in your head, actually paying you more will de-incentivize you to actually perform that task. So things like banking, the more money you pay a banker, the worst job they will actually do, and this is MIT have done research on this, and of course we know experientially that that is the truth, but this hasn't the problem is that the people in that industry don't have an incentive to change because they're doing very well, thank you very much. So they're not incentivized to change, so they need us to help them change, and they can't see the long-term rewards because of course we only see that because we're not benefiting from it at the moment. So what's interesting about these games is that, and Dan Pink talks about this, is that you still need to pay somebody for doing a creative cognitive task, but there's a threshold at which there's like a sweet spot. So usually if you cover that cost of living so that they don't have to worry about survival, they will tend to do a great job with the creative stuff because it frees them up to kind of, you know, wander and you know, brainstorm and things.
Yeah, and John, you have some things to say about this.
Well, the games, I actually look at a lot of education games to try and help the Thai kids, because a lot of teachers in Thailand tell the children that they shouldn't be playing computer games. But it depends what games that they're playing. Yeah, the shoot 'em ups and the stuff that there's no IQ. There's a game called Times Attack. That's Times with a Z, and it's like for learning the times tables, and the whole school can learn. The program is absolutely fantastic. The teachers can monitor it. You can do it class. You can set the levels. You can do the whole school. For multiplication, addition, division, they've got their own game, their own platform. Absolutely fantastic. I can do the answers, but I can't move the little alien around the screen. So I need them to do that. There's another game by the WHO, which is it's like a food or a world hunger after a disaster. So the kids still get to go out in the helicopter and count the people, and then they go back to the lab and they make up the food and the nutrition, and then they take out the drop. So instead of dropping bombs, they're dropping food to the groups that are in trouble, and they can send out convoys. So the kids still get to play helicopters, aeroplanes, cars. There are very good education games out there. I haven't really looked at any of the crypto games. I'm sure if there's anything like the technology, I think they'll be interesting if you have I like crosswords, so I'm quite sure I would be interested in the concepts. But yeah, I mean, the kids, I can't give them a computer back. When I give the kids the computer to try the game, I might lose my computer for 3 hours.
Yeah,
and you can a kid to do arithmetic and multiplication for 3 hours. No way. Not in any country.
it's a lot more interesting for children to learn that way, and it's more of an open environment for them to learn, and they can learn at their own pace with a game type thing if the game is set and made correctly for what you want the children to learn. And there was a very neat game that came out a few years ago that was called Portal, and it was a first-person shooter, and what you had to do was figure out, it was a logic game, and you had to figure out where to go through this hole that popped up in the game. And it looked like, from when I first looked at it, it was like, why in the world would anybody want to play that? It looks completely stupid. But I rented the game, and it was just really addicting. And it was a logic game that I think things like that really help kids and even adults. They learn to use their brains and figure things out more than being told to just read it in a book and figure out an assignment. Okay, you have to do these 20 questions and hand me a sheet of paper with the answers. Oh, I hated that when I was in school.
Well, maybe if somebody come up with a Bitcoin game about setting up wallets and stuff, so there's not you're not losing anything, but that addiction level, you can get a wallet, how to do it, and even like having the hacker sort of thing in it, where if you don't do it correctly, some of your coins go out or something. But one of the problems in Thailand is the English language. So if the games are uh, no written instructions and there's no reading, the kids will play the games and learn. The WHO one was in English language, so as soon as it comes up to a bit of text and some decisions to be made, the kids are lost. But that was done by the WHO, I think. Very, very interesting.
So I'd like to recommend Sebastian de Turding. If you want to learn about game design, UX, this chap is just wonderful. He did a very, very popular video, I think, at Google Talks called Meaningful Play. It's quite an old one, but he basically takes you through how companies manipulate you. I was reporting on this just earlier because I tried to unsubscribe from Dropbox, and Dropbox then said, okay, well, you can, but your account's going to be put back to 5 gigabytes, which is less than when I had actually signed up for the Pro, because before I signed up I had 20 gig because I'd recommended it to people and things like that. So that's called loss of version. So in psychology, particularly people like Daniel Kahneman have worked out that as individuals we're very hard to predict, but when we get together in groups we become a lot more predictable. And if you apply this algorithm, you can put in business logic. So you can say to someone like Dropbox, our business development, right, they need to drive up their revenue, they need to save their costs. They'll say, statistically speaking, if you give someone a splash page like this that subjects them to something that they previously earned but are now going to lose, they will nearly always quit the page and not unsubscribe from the Pro account. So you've got to get people on the crack lolly, right? You've got to get people hooked, and the way to get them hooked is to get them to expend some effort, get them to sacrifice something, and then make them pay. And then once they pay, they won't want to go back because they won't want to lose their sunk costs. And Sebastian de Turding does a wonderful job. In fact, he's got a tweet that I only just seen when I go to his Twitter on how designers are the thieves of time, because they decide what's urgent for you. And what I love about this guy is he's German, and he's also a very philosophical guy. And so he kind of, just has some wonderful, I mean, his slides are brilliant because you have to watch him at the same time. You don't really learn much just by looking at his slides. So usually you have to kind of listen to him kind of going over it at the same time. But yeah, I highly recommend this guy. He's really shining a light on the kind of, it's actually a form of fascism, really, because you're trying to merge together state and industry. You're trying to do what the state does, and you're doing what industry does at the same time within your big multinational corporation.
Well, the games that I mentioned earlier, Times Attack and the food, all the education games that I look for are free. I'm not into paying for stuff, and if I can find a good quality English, typing masters, even colours, things for the kids. Sebran is a very good program for very young children, and I've found some really good education sites. And when the teachers in Thailand see these games, and that's to say, well, yeah, why would you want to teach arithmetic when you could sit in the class and just let the kids play games? And if you're bad at one number, as the 7 times table say, it will keep coming back. It keeps giving you the numbers that you're not good at, and you can't progress to the levels. And that level base is what the kids get very addicted to. So I'll send you a link. I mean, stuff like that. I'm more than happy to recommend, because there's no price, there's no agenda, and it's very good software for everybody. Typing is not my strong point, so a typing tutorial that's free and partly a game is But if somebody can send me a link to the crypto puzzles, I'll have a look.
I love
Yeah,
that.
and a lot of us that are like me, I'm going to be 45 next month. I didn't have computers in school and things, so typing, I knew computers were going to be coming out, and I figured typing was going to be something that I'm going to need to know. So I took a typing class in school, and I hated it because we had the old style typewriters, the manual ones that were really hard to push, and it was horrible, and I failed the class, and I didn't really care. So when I first started typing, it was one finger at a time and looking, and I did
That's
kind of,
that's the stage I'm on at the moment.
and but I have gotten better now. I can type quite well, but now everything's going to the phones and the tablets, and I see these people typing with their thumbs, and they're just going all crazy. And I'm starting to learn to type with my thumbs, but that's very difficult for me now.
It's really a data entry issue because actually I think pretty soon voice recognition is going to get good enough that you're going to be able to just talk to a computer. I mean that's where we're heading, I think. So learning how to type now, you're kind of you're swimming upstream as it were. You're not going. You've got to just go with the flow. Don't learn something for that was useful a year ago. Learn something that will be useful in 5 years.
The Google on the Android stuff, I'm really amazed at how good the voice recognition really is on it. I've tried it on my Android tablet, and I was just blown away by how good it really was. It surprised me because when I've used, I started trying out the voice input back in the 90s when I was working with a lot of people that had chronic diseases and stuff that couldn't use their hands and things, and
Well,
it was
this is where
horrible back
this is where
then.
we're going, Jamie. We're heading towards a society that is much more compassionate. And rather than you being told that, if you don't fit the world, well, screw you, what we're having is building a world that adapts to the individual. So it's, if you're born and you can't walk and you have to spend your life in a wheelchair, tough luck. No, not any longer. We end up building our framework and building our world that accommodates everyone. So the world is malleable and adapts to you rather than forcing you to be malleable and adapting to the world.
Yeah, adaptive technology, I guess is what we called it. And now, with the open source movement, has really gained steam and gotten a lot bigger in the last, I would say 3 years. It's really exploded. Whereas before that, Linux came out in what was it, 92 when, and I started looking at Linux back in, probably 97 or so, but I never really caught on to it, and I'm still using a Microsoft operating
Can
system
I
on my
can
main
I interrupt
PC.
you? Linux is something that I've heard about and I see it advertised and stuff. Most of the people that I know use Windows. It's either Windows or a Mac. But can I've got some old laptops here. What's the advantage of me having one of them run a Linux or Linux system?
Um, Massive advantages. It's an open source operating system that I think is definitely in the long term, it's going to end up, beating these proprietary systems we've got. So you would be supporting an open source project. It's been around for a very long time, since the early 80s, Linus Torvalds.
90s, 92, I think it was.
Oh,
Right.
really?
So
Okay.
which Linux system or Linux system should you go for, like
Well,
for a beginner, because
th-
it's going to be different from Windows, yeah.
this is a controversial topic as to which distro or distribution you pick, but most people prefer Ubuntu or Linux Mint because those are the most
Linux,
user friendly.
Linux, Mint.
Mint and Ubuntu.
Yeah,
I know
and there's
Ubuntu, but
several different flavors of each. The Mint, I like the Debian versions of Linux. A lot of people use the Ubuntu. You can get Ubuntu in Debian, but like Linux Mint comes in an Ubuntu form and a Debian form.
So what's the easiest for people to go and like me that's maybe willing to format an old computer and have a try and see what Linux is about.
You can go and download the ISO image to make a bootable USB or a bootable CD-ROM off
Yeah.
of, I think it's just linuxmint.com or .org. If you just type it into a search engine,
Okay.
it will come up. And if it's an older PC and not like a dual core or anything like that, you want to download the i386 version.
No, it's not so much that they're old. There maybe I think one's got a 150 or 300 gig, but it's old. It's maybe 4 or 5 years old. This is a couple of bits broken on the USB. Things don't work so well a little bit. It just needs tidied up. But if I have to do that, maybe just ask them to install Linux Mint for me and play around with it. It won't be my main computer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
what I recommend is just starting to use it as a secondary thing and learning it. Um, One thing with Linux is you do a lot more command line stuff or stuff that you have to type in for some things. Um, and that's
I can do that.
probably why it hasn't taken over for Microsoft or Apple yet, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've
Um,
got friends and they tell me when I've got problems, okay, open up your command window and type this, and so I mean it's not strange. So say
Yeah,
I know a little bit
that is
about.
a massive barrier to entry because I've got a new laptop so that we can manage the private keys for WCN, and I'm trying to install Vanity Gen, and it's just impossible because it's got these two dependencies, and one of them is SSL, and I can't get it to install. I just cannot get it to install, and there's nothing online that helps you because everyone says, "Oh yeah, I did it and it worked fine," and it's like, well, it doesn't on mine. It says it can't locate the program. So when you've got software like that that has dependencies, there isn't a one-click install solution like you get on these other ones. You have to actually get your hands dirty. And so the question is, like, one of the annoying things, and I was going to do an impromptu show the other night, and I might do one soon, is I've been meeting with people in London, and if you're in London at the moment, you know how much of a cesspool it is because the cost of living is going up so much. Everyone's obsessed with money. Like everything you ever talk about is always couched in terms of how do we make money out of this. That's the first thing you do. So I'm trying to do these education courses, and a few of these parasites, these kind of financial parasites, have cottoned on to the fact that there now is rising demand for education in this space, particularly with Bitcoin. And one of the things they're doing is, of course, they're coming to me and they're saying, right, I want to set up a course. And the first thing they talk about is, right, sponsorship. You know, we've got to get the money in and, you know, we can, but then it's like, and then as soon as you get into the conversation, they're saying, well, don't advertise that product. If you show them how to buy Bitcoins, use my product. And it's like, well, okay, yeah, but I've got to do what's right by the student. No. It's all about monetization. And what I'm finding is that there's got to be a middle ground. I often hear this phrase be used, the everyman. You've got to make it work for the everyman, as if they know what that even means. And the thing is, you don't. I mean, actually, it's a technical term that comes from philosophy, das Man, which comes from Heideggerian philosophy, which is the idea that when you say they, you are impersonalizing people and reducing them to the mean. So you're just kind of, you're de-individuating people. There's a common saying that the crowd is stupid, but the individual is smart. It's when people get together in groups, they become much easier to predict and to manipulate. Now, one of the things I'm trying to do is you've got to marry it. You can't just say to people, right, here's a one-click solution and just treat them like children. That's the first thing I get when I talk to somebody about how to teach Bitcoin. Everyone's got an opinion. Everyone jumps in and says, no, you can't tell them about that. That's too complicated. And I'm like, well, hang on. How do I know? As a community, as an industry, Bitcoin hasn't really been taking any feedback from the newbies, from the people that don't know about it yet. All we do
I
is
had
opine.
I
Yeah, well,
had somebody ask me on Facebook this morning, "Oh, but Bitcoin is really interesting. I need to learn that." And somebody said, "Well, Jamie's the guy that you should ask." And I'm like, "Well," or they said, "Jamie's an expert." And I said, "No, I'm not an expert, but
right.
I have contacts and I can probably find you the answers to what you need to know." And, you know, beware of anybody that says they're an expert at anything.
Right, exactly. Yes, that's exactly it. No one is an expert, and it's about admitting early when you don't know something. And when I've seen a lot of people teach Bitcoin, they tend to start making things up if the student starts asking them questions they're not sure about. I have been into Bitcoin for many years. I studied cryptography when I was a kid, and even I'm learning new things all the time about it. I'm at the moment drafting up a new curriculum. It's based on the one that I used to do, based on the presentation I used to give. But I'm looking at how other people are teaching it. I'm looking at the comments under those videos and tutorials, and I'm looking at what people have problems with, and then I'm adapting, because this, teaching is a two-way communication between you and the student. Both the learner and the teacher learn at the same time. I used to lecture for a living, and I never learned as much as I did than when I started lecturing, because it makes you responsible for your knowledge. When you start imparting knowledge to other people, it's a very humbling experience, because now it's like, oh, I better make sure that what I'm telling you is right. And I always assumed that I knew about that, but actually I might just, the night before I'd go back and I'd check my lecture notes, and I'd be like, oh gosh, I was certain that this
Yeah.
was true.
And
The other thing is there's terminology barrier, because you use a lot of terms that the non-crypto people and non-Bitcoin people are not so familiar with, and you guys just tend to brush straight through it. So
Right, and there's several opinions on this in psychology and pedagogy, which is the study of how to teach. And some people think that you should have a hands-off approach, and some people think that you should, really, really. I think it was Jean-Pierre. No, not Jean-Pierre Genet. It's a director. I can't remember his name. 1930s psychologist. It will come back to me. Where he was a constructivist, and he said what you do when you take in new information is you construct it based on what you already know. So you start fitting it into existing paradigms. And this brings up the problem of the metaphor. Now, a metaphor is when you take a simple system and try to use it to describe a more complex system. So the common thing I had the other day in a conversation with someone is I always try to start with the ledger, right? From finance, and I tried to describe the blockchain technology rather than the currency first. And he said, oh, no, don't do that, because they won't understand it. And he said, no, you've got to just say it's email for money. And so this analogy that we've started to goes around quite a lot. It's email for money, or it's HTTP for money. The problem with these metaphors is that at some point it'll stop working. And what that does is it's what I call learner's remorse. Learner's remorse is when someone describes something to you, like GCSE physics, where you're taught Newtonian physics. But then later on in life, you'll come across some new information. You'll realize that metaphor was always wrong. And what it does is it creates a sense of betrayal. And it creates a sense of, oh, I wish that teacher had just given me a little bit more credit and described the philosophy a bit more. So where I'm at the moment is I tend to start with, Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer currency that isn't controlled by any central authority. And that tends to work for most people because it's just got enough complexity in it that it describes to you what it is. Sometimes I substitute peer-to-peer with digital, sometimes I substitute it with virtual, sometimes I substitute authority with government and banks. That usually, what you're looking for is the little expression you get in return. Like if it's a waiter or something and you haven't got enough time to go through the whole thing, just look for the little expression. If they go, oh, that's interesting.
light bulb moment, yeah. When the light bulb goes on, then
Yeah.
they get it.
The penny drop. And actually I'm of the view personally that you should not dumb things down. I think that when you listen to someone teaching Bitcoin or any complex subject, just listen to it and let it wash over you like music. There'll be some things you'll understand, there'll be some things you don't, but just listen to it anyway, because every now and again there'll be something that clicks. And the assumption of the patronizers, and I mean that in the original sense, patronize means to give someone what they need. The problem with that school of thought, with the everyman, is that you're not giving your students enough credit. You're not lifting them up, you're holding them down. because you're giving them too much. And what you need to do is sprinkle the education with just enough little hooks in it that they go, oh, I now want to listen to this lecture again. So that, and each time they go through it like a record, they learn more and more each time, because there will be certain things that they will understand. Now, I think that the reason Bitcoin is so mimetic, the reason why we want to teach it so much, is because it itself is memory. It is a source of retention. It's an irreversible single history model of storage of a sequence of events. That's what it does. It's a distributed timestamp server. And as memory, it makes itself want to be remembered. That as soon as you get the penny drop, you want to tell someone else about it. And I think what we've got wrong in the last 5 years is that we've allowed the incentives of the money and the price going up to get in the way of the education. And now the parasites are starting to realize that the game's up because we invested too quickly. A lot of people overinvested in the last 5 years. They invested too quickly. And now the price, although I believe in the long run is undervalued, right now it's too far ahead. The price got too expensive too soon. It's not that it isn't worth a lot more than it currently is, it's just not yet, because there are now not enough buyers in the market to actually support it, because no one's going to support something unless they're convinced that it's better than what they had before.
Yeah, I think so, that's true. They, and you know, like you were saying before too, the speaking for other people or speaking, generalizing groups, and it's something that I think a lot of people do, and it's something I try very hard not to do, but I know I do it myself, and you just say, well, they do that or they do this. But I know that the monetization of it has become really big, and when we look at how much money goes into development of Bitcoin and how much money goes into marketing and venture capitalism for other stuff, I mean, it's really a ridiculous comparison ratio, because right now, what do we have? One main Bitcoin developer?
We have three. There are three. There's Vladimir, there's Gavin, and I don't remember the other guy's name. But yeah, I watched them on the. So this is how corrupt the system is now. Is everyone assumes that things that used to work are going to keep on working. So the old business model was you had a factory owner, and the factory owner had the monopoly on the means of production, and people that turned up to work for you were interchangeable and expendable, and that they could be just replaced with other people. Now everyone owns the means of that production. We're in a knowledge-driven economy, and it's not that the old-fashioned scarcity-based economy is just going to die. It's not that things aren't going to be scarce anymore. It's just that now we're living in a world with two different asset classes, one that is finite and one that is infinitely replicable, or at least functionally infinite, like digital information. What was necessary was a system of digital scarcity, and that's what Satoshi stumbled upon. I don't think Satoshi realized that's what they'd stumbled upon, but then Hal Finney comes in on the mailing list very early on in Bitcoin's development and says, look at what you've done. You've created a distributed database, and money is all about the distance between our decisions of sacrifice. You spend your money at intervals, and in between that interval is a period of time. Now, what the industry and what capital had done was helped us relate to space very well, but what we also needed was how that industrial model was going to fit in with the digital realm, the virtual realm. And one of the comments I came across yesterday on the video is this lady had come in on this video, on this sort of, it was like quite a newsy, but it was also educational. And she said, look, I've been looking at Bitcoin, but the problem with it is that, you know, traceability. People are going to be able to see what I'm doing everywhere I go. And I sort of came in and I said, well, look, if you go to torbrowser.org and you download the Tor browser and then you go to blockchain.info and set up a wallet without registering your email, just go to a meetup and buy some Bitcoins with cash, and there, boom, you've got it. You've got your anonymous thing. The fact is that cash doesn't work on the internet. So whilst cash is the ideal form of untraceable money spending, it's not going to work online, and that's your solution. We needed that traceability. So people are curious and they are willing to learn. The problem is at the moment, like you say, they're just getting marketing, and people know when they're being lied to.
When I first contacted you, that's what I was suggesting at the time, is we need somewhere physical where people can go and learn. Well, I think I suggested like a music thing or something. So if the guy wants a beer, the beer tent's only selling in Bitcoin, so he has to do it. If he wants a hot dog, you got to. So you would spend a day enjoying yourself, but have a lot of people. And the guy next to you, the guy behind you, he wants a beer. If you're taking too long, he'll come and help you. Look, just do that. This is what I see as a barrier, is familiarity with doing the transactions, either sitting with a friend across the room and doing stuff, or I mean, you're saying about meetups and certain people, but most of the people I think that go to meetups are kind of clued up about it. If you've done something like a music festival, you may get a whole new crowd of people that like to go to the music, and they haven't got a clue about Bitcoin. But if they want to eat, if they want to spend things and buy t-shirts, they would have to learn. So that was my original thinking, is somewhere where we can get together, not for a Bitcoin meetup. Sure, you could have a tent, but a whole function away from Bitcoin, but make Bitcoin the currency at the event. No fiat currency.
Yeah, we have got events like that across Europe. I think there's one in Berlin where you can trade and you can buy things in Bitcoin. We try to do that as much as possible at the London meetups, but a lot of the venues that we go to aren't always willing to accept it. But there are ways around it.
That's I say. I'm kind of stuck over here, and it's things like that. I think this is what we need to do. You need to get people that are interested in using it for another reason, and if it's their only option, yeah, you don't have to drink beer, you don't have to eat hot dogs. But if you're there for a whole day, I'm sure that the incentive would be there to buy water, juice, oranges, and if you've come with your dollars, you'll just need to go to the cash machine and figure it out. So I think that this will say people who like music or some other event, they may not be that interested in Bitcoin, but if they're there for the music, then they would be submersed into a Bitcoin event, and then they might the pennies would drop. Wow, okay, I've got it now. So something like that, just to me, is maybe it's more needed in a place like Thailand or Asia or something, where there's we can get a crowd for something. But if you try to hold a Bitcoin event, you might be struggling. Yeah, might
Yeah,
not be
we
that many.
actually had somebody else from Ghana now on Twitter. Somebody from Ghana contacted me to say, "Oh, actually, I also attend the meetup that Mitch attends." So we're starting to build a critical mass. And Nick's idea was that we reach out to parts of the world that are developing economically, but now just about have good enough internet connectivity. I think it's a mistake to focus on countries like Kenya because they've already got a monopolistic company there that controls the flow of capital. You're better off focusing on regions of the world like yours, where we've already got the ability to build an infrastructure.
Well, I mentioned before the show started that I spoke to a friend who's in Australia at the moment, but he's been in Burma for about the last 8 or 10 years, and I was explaining to him about Bitcoin, and it's not something he's familiar with. So I said, well, you want to have a look, because Burma is a place where the junta control the money. They're subject to all sorts of things, but the traders and stuff, I mean, to have it, the people, they've all got mobile phones and things, so if they can carry their money in their wallet. Laos is another country where you need a couple of carrier bags to carry the local currency. So I think there's enough foreigners kicking around and stuff, and tourists. I mean, the backpacker area, I've had to look online. They call it a Koh San Road, Soi Koh San in Bangkok. That's the backpacker area. Now, there's a few Bitcoin things I've tried to look on the internet to see where it is in Thailand. So Thailand gets about 12 million visitors per year. That's a lot of folk coming in. Now, they would like Bitcoin, but where can they spend it? That's the problem. Where
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yep.
okay, maybe that one backpacker street is very well catered, but the rest of Thailand, we need to try and
And something
uh,
tells me you've got an answer for this.
maybe, but it's not my project, so I won't speak. I will try and get my friend to join the Podio group. He liked that Podio
What
system. I told him about it, and he thought it was great for his own business. So I will invite him on, and he's more of a mover and a shaker. I'm stuck at a temple, so I can help. I can help introduce people. I can give some ideas, but I don't do business, and I don't. I'd like to help. I'm sure there's a lot of hotels in Thailand if they knew they could get more business with Bitcoin and digital currencies and stuff, but they wouldn't know how to do it. So I might have to go and help a hotel set it up. That's fine. I don't charge for it. It's okay. This is it. But please don't rely on me to look after your money. And if you forget your passwords, I can't help. That's a worry. And
Well,
that's
you've got to
something.
teach people to take individual responsibility because this is the problem with the banking system. The British Asia, BBC Asian correspondent did a news broadcast last night on the rate of credit card fraud is rising because card not present transactions are going up. And apparently the banking system have got big problems with this. So now they're investing in algorithms that try to predict your spending habits so that if you get like a large jewelry purchase on your credit card, they can preemptively cancel and block the transaction. This is just exactly what the banking industry does wrong, is it doesn't try to rethink its whole business model from the ground up and say, actually, is there something systemically wrong from the root with this? Because you can't have that with Bitcoin because it's a push-based mechanism, not a pull-based mechanism. And effectively, when you pay for something with credit card, it's tantamount to
Okay,
saying,
this is one of the terms that you guys kind of breeze right over, the push and the pull. Now, I watched the video today, so I do understand it, but I only understood it today. The push system and the pull system. It's the basic concepts like that that my parents or my sister and that probably wouldn't wouldn't understand. So these are the figures show that you're talking about.
well, no, this is what I was about to say, is that it's the credit card system is tantamount to saying, send me an email. I'll tell you what, have my password to my Gmail and just leave me a message. That's what the banking system does. And what happens is that too many people are able to cheat that system. So what they do is they say, okay, not just a password this time, but give me the number on the back. And whilst you're at it, give me your name and your address. And they hope that by putting on these layers, these different factors of authentication on top, eventually it will get so hard for the fraud. The fraud will need so much information about you that they wouldn't bother. They're trying to raise the cost of fraud. The problem is that if you're really good at fraud and the incentive is there and there's enough money to be had, you will take those kinds of risks. And so what ends up happening is the entire industry ends up funding the fraudsters. So you end up with a good tier of fraudsters that will just be able to do this and evade capture. Meanwhile, you've got this bloated insurance industry that's absorbing all of the costs. But what they're doing, of course, is they're raising the cost of doing business. So Visa, for example, if too many customers complain to your restaurant and say there have been too many chargebacks with you, Visa will then stop your account and they will say, right, you're not allowed to continue doing business unless we change the payment terms because you've had too many chargebacks at your restaurant. That's not the fault of the business owner. So what the business owner now has to do is raise the cost of all of the drinks and all of the meals because they got to pass the cost on to somewhere. And so what we don't realize is we're basically driving with the brakes on in our economy. We've got this massive parasite that's leeching off our day-to-day activities, preventing us from taking risks, preventing us from coming up with new business ideas because the cost of starting a business in the first place is more than we can even afford our rent. And this is the problem that London has. London talks about tech city and driving innovation. If people can't even afford to pay their rent, how are they expected to start a business and how are they going to be competitive with developing regions of the world like yours?
Well, this is a big tourist industry, so a lot of people that do come here come with credit cards. Unfortunately, there's a lot of foreigners that come here and use scammers because their own countries are uh, getting smart, and it's getting harder, but they come here en masse with hundreds of cards in their pockets and stuff, and they mingle with the tourists and stuff. So it is a problem here, and there's plenty of lads sitting in jail at the moment. I visit prisoners as well, and they think they can get away with it, and then they complain. Well, if you don't like the conditions in the Thai jail, you should have done your credit card fraud back home, because it's a tough shift here. And there's if anybody's watching the show and you think it's an easy make here, go visit the jails first. The technology, and they're getting caught more and more. So I agree. The Bitcoin, this is what I say, the companies, we sell a lot of stones, gemstones in Thailand. It's probably the gem capital of the world for sales. So people coming in with fraudulent, the Rolex watches, and there's a big business here, and people aren't paying in cash, they're paying in credit cards. So I'm sure the retailers, it would be in their advantage, because if people write a check, if you pass Bitcoin, you've got them. You can't pay for something with Bitcoin if you don't have them. So I see a lot of advantages for this country, just because of the amount of tourists. And if I can try and understand some of it and show any benefit, not to me, but to help other people, what do you think? Well, this is it. These are the shows to watch. These are the sites to look on and try and understand. But it will come. They can't put genie back in the bottle.
The Bitcoin ATMs and stuff that are popping up now, I just saw there was a article on CoinDesk or Cointelegraph, one of those two, that they counted over 200 ATMs around the world now for Bitcoin. And those are going to be a very important part of adoption. One thing, like you were talking about the festivals and stuff, here where I live, we have a lot of things in the summertime where they're local carnivals or fairs where they have things like tractor pulls, and a band will play at night, and then they sell beer. And when they sell the beer, you don't go up and pay them money for beer and they give you a beer. You have to go buy tickets, and then they give you tickets, and then you got to pay for the beer with a ticket. And
well, Thailand has that in all the food courts and all the malls and stuff here. They do not want the staff handling the money. You go to one lady, you get your tickets, you do your food, you can change the tickets back in at the end. It stops a lot of the fraud. Yeah.
And that, if they're going to have the ticket booth to sell the stuff, I mean, they could just as easily accept the Bitcoin right at the ticket booth as sell tickets, and it would lower the cost because they wouldn't have to make all these tickets.
And more hygienic as well.
Yeah, those tickets.
Point.
And coins and dollars and all of that stuff is filthy. Currency, old-fashioned currency, is just nasty if you look at all the crud that's on it.
It just reminded me of when I went to Kenya. I mean, some of the money they put on the counter, you could actually smell the money. It's been in people's shoes or down their socks, and it's some nasty look. How much is it worth? Like 5 cents. I just keep it.
Yeah, exactly. It's not worth 5 cents at all, is it? You're actually diminishing the price. I mean, these euro notes are really, the euro note's not particularly nice. And also, I've got a dollar, got a greenback, and that looks pretty. A lot of these bills that I was getting in America were pretty ragged. And the Australians are making them. The Australians are making their banknotes out of plastic now. They've got this new technology.
Bitcoin is good for anti-cocaine use. Nobody's using bitcoins.
No one's using Bitcoin private keys to snort coke.
Not that I've seen. I suppose you could roll up your paper wallet, but
Yeah.
it would be a lot more effort.
So no, as I say, the Bitcoin gets a bad press, but there is things that I look at, IG, the hygiene angles and things like that. As I say, if I'm not looking at the money, I can start looking through the project at different angles. So I'll let everybody else worry about the money because I'll never have enough to worry. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
but
if I take a transaction, I'll probably have about 3 cents left or something.
But I saw a story too the other day now. Mozilla has a new phone operating system out that's going to cost, I think it's like 23 or 29 American dollars that they're releasing. And that's going to make smartphones a lot more accessible in areas like yours. I don't know or how many people have cell phones or smartphones over where you live at, John?
Everybody,
Okay,
everybody, children to farmers. Phones are very cheap here. We're next door to China. We can buy copies. I can buy Rolex for $10, iPads. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, but it works. Uh, Technology pretty cheap. Cameras I think are expensive, but most most phones we can buy a phone for $10 or something like that. It's maybe not great, but uh, nearly every kid's got them. And they've all got their little smartphones and play games on it. I think we can buy I got Galaxy Y. It was probably about $100 when I got it.
yeah,
So I don't
and
know. Cost.
here I just got a smartphone, 3 months ago. I just got this. I had just a regular old-fashioned phone up until then, or a flip phone. And I still use that one for calling. All this one is for is because I can get internet and stuff on it. But they've really come down in price because this one cost me $35 a month and it has unlimited internet and unlimited texting. So, and it's through Virgin Mobile, I think.
Internet here's still a bit of a problem, but it's in different areas. So, like me, I've got maybe 2 or 3 different SIM cards, and I can usually connect wherever I am. But
Did you
uh,
guys see this quote the other day from Benedict Evans, who said more people on Earth have a mobile phone than a street address?
wow,
Huh. I believe that because I've heard stories about Africa where, you know, all their stuff is being done through text messaging and stuff now because so much of the population has mobile phones compared to any other form of communication, or they don't have full-blown computers or laptops over there, but just about everybody has a smartphone.
yeah,
And it
because you
really
don't need an address to get you don't need an address to get a prepaid phone.
Right. So this in technology and in philosophy of technology, we talk about the URI, the Universal Resource Indicator. So URI scheme. And this is the way that this is what the internet is built up on. A lot of people think of the internet as something separate from the world, and it's not. The internet is the world, right? Because every online action has a corresponding and preceding offline action, right? So everything that takes place online happens offline. What the internet did is it allowed for entities to exist without a stable spatial referent, without being able to point to it, apophansis in apophene in ancient Greek, to point out the phenomena, right? So now phenomena can exist in a world without you being able to point to it. And what this does is it creates a stability, it creates a resiliency to existence. Because in the old days, if something could exist in space, it could also be attacked and destroyed, whereas now things can exist without it. And what this means is that when you start getting portable devices and you start getting CPUs get smaller and smaller and smaller, and you can start carrying around, mobile phonic devices like these, is it allows you to become addressable without having an address. I can now address you and communicate with you without having to be in a fixed location, and therefore you not being at the mercy of a government. I was watching the Kaiser report last night on Russia Today. He's still peddling this agenda of trying to bash the dollar? Are you still going, all out, the dollar's going to crash and all of this kind of thing? And one of the things that always comes up is real estate. And I know a lot of people in the UK, we're entering another bubble in the real estate market, particularly in the UK, where the banks are trying to recapitalize their balance sheets. They're trying to get particularly first-time buyers who are very vulnerable, trying to woo them with advertising campaigns of like, you can have your dream home, and they've got a picture of a puppy and an engagement ring, and they're trying to force you into this civilization, this lifestyle that they know that you've been brought up with. And what they want is, of course, they don't want the property. Why? Well, because property is fixed. And governments have been known to seize property, seize land. In fact, in America, there are some clauses where if you're caught with drugs on your own property, they can actually take that property away from you because they make the land itself guilty of the offense. There's all these kind of weird backdoors that governments build in.
We don't even have to be caught with it. We just have to be accused.
Yes, that's it. And they've been known to raise land tax, and you can't get out of this. You can't get away because the land is there and it is attackable and it is taxable. So when I like to store my wealth, I like to do it with actual physical things that I can carry around with me. As Socrates said, I want no more gold than I can carry on my back, because otherwise I'm a target. If I've got too much wealth, I become a target because people will always want it, and it's always going to be desirable. So I want enough money that I can live on, and I don't have to worry too much, but not so much that I end up becoming a liability.
And that's what I see my house as now, because I still have a mortgage on my house, but I have paid 12 years on my mortgage, so I have a vested interest into my house. And I have, so I feel like I'm stuck here because I don't want to give up what I've already invested into it. And I could sell it, but at the market price now, it would be about the same as just walking away.
Right. And this is another trick that the banks pull on people, is called, it's like the Dropbox, loss aversion. Is that they want to trap you into a sort of negative equity spiral where it's not quite worth you not paying off the debt, so you may as well kind of pay it, but then at the same time you're also having to work, you're having to sacrifice your life. And as I said the other day, in Papua New Guinea, 2 to 5 hours worth of labor will get you shelter from nature. And the people in Papua New Guinea are perfectly happy. There have been studies done on this. But in the West, it's 30-year mortgages. And as we've seen in Detroit and in Chicago and regions like this, where people fall into negative equity, but the banks didn't quite calculate the loss aversion curve, the manipulation didn't quite work. So what ended up happening is people just walked out of these houses because it just wasn't worth. The loan was bigger. And it was easier for the person to walk away and just not pay the debt. And what ended up happening is gangs ended up moving into these houses and started using them to stash their drugs and stash their guns. And so now the real cost starts to emerge. Now, the banks are okay because they get bailouts. So they're able to recapitalize, but the communities end up suffering because they're left with the fallout, they're left with the rising crime, and then the police end up needing more budget from the local government. So all this is really about, if you want to play the bankers' game, if you want to do what they do, what you do is you cut and run, right? You pull off the crime, you make yourself too big to jail, you get the bailout, and then you fuck off. You go away and you leave someone else to clean up the mess.
Yeah, you build up, you take all the credit offers that they give you and take all you can grab and just do exactly what the bank does, is just say, I'm not responsible for it anymore, and piss off and say, okay, I'm starting over. And that's the way that's what happened in 2008. The banks got a bailout, and that's what's happening with a lot of things, and a lot of people are doing that now to the banks, and that's also compounding the problem with making the banks are trying to recoup that cost of all these people doing that to them now. So it's really made the cost of having loans and things that much more for the people that are trying to do it honestly, because the system is set up to be dishonest.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd like to take this opportunity to invite people to donate to Jamie on the show if you like what Jamie's up to and the conversation that we're having. This is designed, you can also kind of use this as a voting mechanism, right? So if you really like the format of the show, you can express that through a small, modest donation to Jamie. This is the Bitcoin address. Also bear in mind that on World Crypto Network, we are now putting our QR codes in the top right corner of our videos. So if you like what a particular person has to say and you can see a Bitcoin QR code, feel free to pause the video and scan in and send them a donation, because as we're talking about at the moment, we're talking about a changing global economy where a lot of the jobs are being automated away. People aren't able to afford to shelter themselves from nature, and as a result we need to discover a new type of economy, a post-scarcity economy perhaps, as some people have suggested. So you can be a part of that movement if you want to, and just by making a small donation, and this all goes towards helping the cause. I'd like to, if you don't mind, Jamie, I just noticed that Brandon Johnson, made a comment about 10 minutes ago asking if we were familiar with Waldorf education. And this philosophy is a humanistic approach to pedagogy. It's based on the educational philosophy of Austrian philosopher Rudolf Steiner. Was found in Anthroposophy. I'm not actually familiar with a lot of these terms, so this is very good. I'm glad that you brought this up. And this is a really an interesting, because what we're noticing now, and I was mentioning Max Kaiser, and I wanted to know what you think, Jamie. Last night, Max Kaiser said that ISIS was akin to a libertarian state. He said libertarians, and I'm trying to thread this in terms of education and marketing, because clearly Max Kaiser has an agenda. He's working for Russia Today. It's funded by the Russian KGB. So clearly people are under pressure to toe a certain line. So what you'll notice him do on the Kaiser report is he always wants to steer the conversation with his guest, to sort of say that the dollar's going to collapse, and all of this kind of anti-American sentiment. And last night was really interesting because Bitcoin has a large libertarian contingent, and he's had on the show before Julia Toriansky. What do you make of this analogy, libertarianism and ISIS?
Yeah, he's had a lot of Bitcoin people on there. He's had Amir Taki and Peter Todd and a lot of these people on there. But yeah, to say ISIS is akin to libertarianism that's just wrong.
Yeah, I don't get it, because it's completely the opposite. They're an autocracy, and they're
I
taxing people, and they're taxing you if you're Christian. If you're Christian, you can stay, but you have to pay more.
Well, my understanding of ISIS is it's a group created by the Central Intelligence Agency
Well,
in the
right, right,
United
right. Okay,
in
but
the
hang on a minute.
United.
That wasn't intentional. Are you saying that was intentional, or are you just saying they funded
Yes,
some people? Okay. Yeah, I mean,
when
we don't have any direct evidence for that, as I understand.
yeah we do.
Well, we know that they were funded, but we didn't know that that was the intended consequence when they were funded. It's just that this tends to happen when you fund a bunch of people that that it's my enemy's enemy is my friend, but they're still your enemy. So if you fund them, and after you've got rid of your co-enemy, then they're going to just become your enemy, aren't they?
Yeah, because when the gassing in Syria happened and they were trying to place the blame on Assad, what had happened was, it turned out to be, it was a well documented frame job of they were trying to frame Assad for gassing these civilians. And that was documented. That wasn't happened. Even the United Nations Security Council went in there and did an investigation and said, no, this wasn't Assad. It was this Islamic group. And then it was even within that same week in Turkey, this group of people was rated by I can't think of it was one of the international police groups that raided the place in Turkey and found all these chemical weapons. So it was quite obvious that Assad didn't do it, and there's speculation that it was the CIA that funded it and created this ISIS group, and it all just seems like a lot of fear mongering to me. And
You mean ISIS aren't funded by Bitcoin?
Well, exactly. The fact is that they aren't funded by Bitcoin.
Oh,
They don't need to be. You've got a perfectly good dollar system that does it.
yeah, they don't have Bitcoin as far as I know. I mean, I haven't talked to any ISIS people or anything. The only thing I've heard of ISIS is propaganda
Mm. Yeah,
from
they've got
what I
Twitter
could.
accounts. They're very active on social media, which is why the CIA have had to up their game, and now they've got social media accounts because we've now got a growing number of young people that are entering the adult population who value openness. And this is a problem with our old industrial systems, is that they're very afraid of openness, and their whole business model relies on privacy, keeping things a secret for a long time, so that you can extract as much rent for as long as possible. But now we have a younger generation of people who actually come through and assume that privacy is a function of time. They know that it's not going to last forever, and so they assume that everything they do is going to be public eventually. Look at all these nude photos that are coming out. We've got a rising market in blackmail. So blackmail is on the rise, and people are being blackmailed with naked pictures because face recognition software is getting cheaper. So all you've got to do is scour through, pictures online, find that naked picture of that person they did 10 years ago and they've forgotten all about, match it up with a Facebook identity, and then start saying, right, I'm going to send this to all your friends if you don't pay, $15,000. And of course, you may as well just let them do it, right? But that's not how it feels at the time. So now you've got insurance companies saying that we'll insure you and we'll just keep paying them. And what this younger generation, particularly, you should look up the research of Dana Boyd, who at Microsoft does this. She actually says, look, kids, younger people are really clued up about this. And nowadays, when young people send each other naked pictures because they want to take risks and they want to make themselves afraid, want to make themselves vulnerable to each other, that's a normal part of growing up. They actually assume now that that picture will be public forever. So they actually go, well, I don't care, whatever. It's all open. I've always been naked under these clothes. Did you not realize this? And they just choose not to care. What makes the blackmailers' profit work so well is a cultural stagnation where people just assume that privacy should be the norm and that we should all be able to go off into the dark corners and get up to whatever we get up to.
And I think it's more for the older people that are probably 35 years old and older that are still teetering on that they don't know the difference because they were born with the sense and grew up with the sense that privacy was there because there wasn't all this technology, and they just didn't have the government and everybody able to snoop into every aspect of their life. I mean, when I was a teenager, I remember my dad gave me a silver dollar coin, and my stepdad accused me of stealing it from him because he had one. And for 2 weeks, I had to keep a notebook ledger of everything I bought and spent, and keep track of my finances and show it to him because he thought I was a thief. And it and for to do something like that, to it was like keeping a ledger of all my
you were
financial activities and
you
showing it
were
to
trading
someone.
you were trading silver without a license.
Yeah,
There you are.
but now, I mean, all that stuff with Bitcoin, that every transaction is public. It just doesn't show exactly where it's spent or to what physical location it is. So I had kind of thought of that. I was buying Bitcoins one day on Coinbase, and they wouldn't let me buy them because of some stupid rule that they had. And it had to do with those know your customer rules or something that the United States has, that I had to wait, or I was only allowed to buy $100 worth that day, and I had to wait another 2 hours before that that time period was up. I think that's a Coinbase thing, that they'll only let you buy $100 instantly before you can, in a 24-hour period before, because and that's because they're worried about chargebacks and things.
Mm.
Chris, you use ChangeTip?
Yeah, I use ChangeTip for my social media stuff.
No, I just I was looking at it today because if I'm going to put some donate button or something on a website that I'm doing, so I've fired them off. But do you find ChangeTip quite an easy system to
Oh,
use?
ChangeTip is for social media, so you wouldn't use that as a donation on your website, but you would use it on your Twitter. So people can just donate to you on Twitter by using your name plus ChangeTip and then say $5 or a coffee or something like that. So for your website, you'd want to put a QR code for your Bitcoin address and maybe a link to blockchain.info,
Yeah,
then plus
my
your
web
address.
designer doesn't know about that, so I told her don't
Well,
worry.
well, we can
I'll
talk.
get
Yeah,
that
we
bit
can talk about
help.
that off air.
Yeah.
That's perfectly.
So the Waldorf school, I
Yes, yes.
know there's two in Thailand. There's two Waldorf schools in Thailand. I think it took them about 9 years to actually get a government register for the first one, to get money from the government and be accepted as a school. They
Mm,
have very good uh, results, although the reading tends to be slow to start. The children look like they're behind, but they overtake all the other children in mainstream schools.
mm,
I have an ex-girlfriend from a long time ago, not while I'm a monk. And she works with autistic children, and they do something with the Waldorf school. It's a very interesting concept where the parents have to be involved in home life, and they don't teach an hour of maths and an hour of something else. They tend to work in a morning session where you've got 3 or 4 subjects going on, like real life, yeah,
mm.
where you've got multitasking on. So I've been to the school in Thailand to speak with the people there just to have a look and see what was going on. I was very impressed, and I don't know if it's religious. I think it's just spiritual. They might talk about the spirit rather than being a Christian or being a Hindu or something. But it's yeah, I'd say more parents should look into it.
Yeah, so this was the guy I was thinking about. It's Piaget. Jean Piaget was a psychologist, and the constructive theory of knowing. That was what I was trying to think of earlier, and it does have its critics. You should know, but I'm quite persuaded by his research, although a lot of it's been usurped now by newer research that have better metrics on the age differences. But essentially, it breaks down into kind of 3 stages of learning, where the early part of the child's life, it's all about activities and artistic expression, social capacities and things like that. And then the secondary focuses on critical understanding and fostering idealism. And then I think the overall goal is to, free and morally responsible. Yeah, it is actually about teaching people to be responsible human beings, because even if you choose not to respond to life, because nobody chooses whether they're born and nobody chooses where they're born. The fact is you are going to be born somewhere. The fact is you are responsible. You are able to respond. And if you choose to say, oh, I don't want anything to do with this, well, guess what? That's still a response, right? So the fact is that we live in this kind of world, this civilization, where we outsource a lot of our response to our politicians and our governments, and we say, oh, you can just take all the responsibility and I'll just vote every 4 years, and that way I get to wash my hands of all the hard work, but I'll complain about it. Oh yeah, we'll have a media where we get to moan about how the government do its job, but what are you doing? Like, what? And this sounds like is what they're talking about.
But the parents have to get involved as well. The parents are a big part of that, and I think that's what's missing in the most of the mainstream school. There is no. I think if the parents don't get involved, their children cannot attend these schools.
Right.
Whether
Okay.
the homework
Yeah.
and stuff, filling in bits of books. So I'm not overly familiar. It was a long time ago. I went to see them, and Yeah. Uh, the could you spell the Gin? Is that Piaget?
Yes, it
Jean
is.
Piaget?
Jean-Pierre. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We have these Montessori schools here, and that's some Italian physician started up that idea, and that's kind of a more open thing. But there's one just a few houses down from me, and that seems to be quite popular. And but I don't know much about it. I haven't really looked into them because I don't have children.
No,
So
I don't have children, but you know, the children, when we go to an education class, we get 40 individuals and we cram the same stuff into all 40 of them.
Mm.
So how does how does that work? Whereas some of these, like the Waldorf and some of these other, I'd say alternative education systems, is you give the child a piece of paper and you bring out what's in the child. What do you want to do? Somebody wants to draw a picture. Another one wants to write a poem. Somebody wants to do origami. It's your piece of paper. What you got? Express yourself on this piece of paper,
Yes. It's
rather
about
than
finding out what's
everyone
inside of the child.
the same thing. And for me, that's what I see it as. That the children, once they know that, it's yours. What do you want to do? And a lot of I don't know. What do you think? It's up to you. And that way they've got one piece of paper. Well, what do they do? They usually do what their friends do, but
Well, like Waldorf is saying, you want to turn these children into confident, independent thinkers as adults who take responsibility. They're open-minded, but they still have critical thinking capacity. And what we've got at the moment is an education system that tries to push people into a particular
they can
corridor of learning, rather
fill
than
up the yeah.
rather than
Everybody,
inviting them into a space, and rather than creating a space for them to fill up. We're like, oh well, if we just left them to do whatever they wanted, they'd all become feral and they'd all start, running around. So you're taking this to the extreme without necessarily needing to take it there. I am at the moment of the belief that tyranny begins in parenthood. It begins in bad parenthood. It begins when the child's needs interfere with the parent's needs, because the problem is that you can be a father biologically, but not actually, right? Like you can technically be the father of a child, but if you don't fall into that role, if you don't own it, right, as a role, then you're not really a father to that child. And actually, in my experience, emotional intelligence is way more important than analytical intelligence, at least in the early years. If you can't even help a child to make sense of all of the emotions and all of the thoughts that they have coming to them, they're never going to be able to pay attention to the world. They're never going to be present because they're going to be caught up in their minds the whole time.
yeah, I got on better with kids. I like working with 3-year-olds up to about 9 or 10. I find that they're a very easy group to work with. We've got the same mindset, I think, and it gives me an excuse to play games.
Yes, exactly.
yeah, my experience has been mostly educating adults, where I worked in the library system and in the university system, educating educated people were that had college degrees and had master's degrees in like liberal arts types of things. So they weren't very technical savvy. So what I would try to do when I held the class, I had kind of a general idea of what I wanted to get across in the class, but I would have a group of say 20 librarians in a room, and I had kind of the goal where I wanted to teach them how to troubleshoot some basic computer skills that, I'd have a list of maybe 5 things that I wanted to get across in a 4-hour period. But we kind of I would give a little talk and then we would just kind of wing it from there and see how the flow went. And that seemed to work quite well. And a lot of it was, like you had said earlier, John, was the terminology. I spent an enormous amount of time coming up with analogies. and analogies that take technology or a difficult to understand subject and break it down into something that's the equivalent that a person knows and can understand is one of the best things that a person can use to learn. Or, right now with social media and stuff, memes are really powerful for learning. And a meme is just kind of a visual um, analogy.
Okay, it's something I've heard or seen, but I don't.
Mimetic, yeah, mimetics is where you want mimetic desire is when you want something just because someone else wants it. So you see them with it, and then you want it too. But what memes have turned into on the internet are pictures of lolcats with text. And it's amazing how much you can manipulate people's actions on the internet with a picture of a kitten and some text. Or actually any picture of a celebrity. And I've seen increasing numbers now of screen caps of Facebook posts which allege that, so-and-so suspect has said this on their Facebook profile. And they don't realize these pictures can be manipulated. And they don't realize that just looking at a JPEG on the internet doesn't make it true and doesn't mean that you should just retweet it just because that's what it says. But yeah, I mean, mimetics can be used for good, like any technology. It can be used for good, and it can also be used for bad.
Yeah, and I think I like to use them for good and to explain things to people because it's an easy way for a person to wrap their brain around a difficult subject.
Yeah, well, my friend, I think it was Paul up in Thailand, he was talking about a QR code, and I said, what's that? Well, we were on the phone. Well, you try to explain a QR code to somebody if you're not beside them, or you're not on the internet. And he said, it's sort of like a 3D barcode. It's, okay, I know what a barcode is.
Yeah.
And he's saying, well, you must have seen these. No idea. But it's things like that when you take barcodes and memes and all these other different ones, and in one show, it's a lot to take on board if you're looking for a nice, what is Bitcoin, and it's got all new technology. So I think the older people, the 50s and over, will struggle with it. Yeah. And if you ever want to challenge,
a lot of the people around retirement age that I've met, actually, John, have said to me, look, I don't want to be left out in the cold. I want to know about this technology because I'm entering a period of my life now where I'm going to be very vulnerable, and I want to know what's going on. And I think a lot of them are much more willing to learn than a lot of people give them credit for. Because I mean, my sort of big history theory on this is that pretty much from World War I onwards, we were locked in. We haven't really left. World War I never really ended. It's had a few gaps and intermittences, but we've been at conflict ever since the mechanization of warfare. The proto example, there are many proto examples, but the most one that stands out for me was the Jacquard loom around 1700. This was the automation of textiles, and what you had for the first time is you had a binary operand. You had a device that had an on-off switch. That's what a lot of this technology is defined by, is its on-off switch, not like carpentry and things like that tended to degrade gracefully. And what you had was this technology, this communications technology and this automation made warfare a lot more grisly. It meant that you could commit acts far, far away from you without having to witness the consequences directly. And it fundamentally changed the way we relate to each other. Now, what's happened is a lot of people have adopted this technology without really understanding it. And so they just use it at the application layer. And in a way, what we're doing, you had a splintering of two groups of people. You had your Einsteins and your Niels Bohrs, and then you had your Hitlers. And Hitler actually gave a speech where he said that every race should just stay in their own territory. So let the Mongols be Mongols, let the Aryans be Aryans, let the Jews be Jews, but they can just do it over there. And he actually has this speech. We have now created the opposite of that. This nomadic lifestyle that we're living, this cross-pollination lifestyle, actually says the opposite to what Hitler said. What we're saying is the earth belongs to everyone. that if you, and I love the way Jamie puts it, it says your right to the ownership of property is your ability to maintain it and look after it. And so
Yes.
we've ended up going 180 degrees back from what Hitler's philosophy was, where you just stick to your own and I'll stick to my own and we'll put these borders around us and it'll be socialism but only for us inside of this thing. And we're saying on the contrary, actually people should be encouraged to meet people that are different to them. You should leave your home and go somewhere else and then return changed. And this is the hero's journey. And I think it's wonderful now that we're finally starting to catch up. Like, look at the markets and all of this high frequency cheating. Sorry, I mean high frequency trading, where the aim of the game is to trade quicker than everyone else, and the aim of the game, like we see with the bots manipulation on the BTCE just another couple of days ago, is because most of those trades on those markets are fake. They're the confederates that work for that company are buying and selling into their own order book because they can. It's free. They don't have to pay any fees when they trade. And so you end up walking into a hologram as an outsider coming into the system, and you think it's real because you're looking at all the shadows on the wall and they're sort of doing these sort of funny little shapes on the projector, and they're able to fool you into thinking that something's happening. But it isn't really true because you haven't taken the care to understand how this system works. They're taking advantage of your lack of curiosity. But what I'm noticing now is a lot of people are coming to me and they're saying, actually, Chris, I'll pay you for an experience, a teaching experience. I could do some videos, maybe they have done some videos, but I've got questions, and I can't ask a question from a static video or a book. So they actually come to me and they say, I want you to tell, because I trust your philosophy, I like the way you teach this, you try to relate it to the big picture, and that's what we need more of. We need people that are not into Bitcoin to tell us what they need. They need to say, right, here's where I'm coming from, and here's what I've got problems with, start from here.
Yeah,
I think one of the problems is, too, people don't know the basic stuff of how just to set up a wallet, and it's very difficult to know how to choose which wallet you should get. There's so many choices, and that's one thing that always gets me, even at the grocery store, is you go there and it's like, okay, I want to get some mayonnaise. Well, which kind do I get? But it's the same thing with the Bitcoin wallets. You have Armory, you have Bitcoin QT, and even with Armory, I had to ask Chris when I downloaded that. It's like, well, now it's asking me to install the other one too, because I'm like, well, why the hell do I got to install that? I just installed Armory, and well, that one's dependent on it. So
There are two ways to teach Bitcoin. This is one of the Bitcoin in 5 Minutes by Scott Driscoll is one of the best ways to learn Bitcoin for the first time. And there really are there are actually many ways of teaching Bitcoin, but there are a few bad ways. That one of the bad ways is to go into the economics early on or to go into mining very early on, because all you'll end up doing is getting bogged down in complicated language and also opinions. When you talk about economics, really what you're talking about is opinions on human action, because that's what economics studies. It studies human action. And there are two main ways you can start with Bitcoin. You can either do an inductive learning technique where, like Jamie is saying, you actually show them setting up a wallet. And that technique is perfectly good because it means the person then can go away and start practicing, and you just have to make sure that, tell them not to buy any more Bitcoin than they can afford to lose. Maybe just $5 or something, just initially, just to play around with so they get the experience and they will learn for themselves. But it's also important not to just give them the surface level, the mere appearances of things, but also to take them under the hood. Now, what Scott has done, and he's very kindly open sourced his graphics for me to use, so I've been breaking it down recently as I've been going through and rebuilding my course, is he starts with the ledger. And that's important because the ledger is not quite like the blockchain. The ledger actually comes from finance, and this comes from double entry bookkeeping systems. So what I've started to do is break down the language and find, like, it describes a record of activities on a network called transactions, but the blockchain, which is the digital equivalent, actually is a special type of database that exists on everyone's computer. So he's saying, start with the ledger, then go to the network, tell them how, you know, the ledger records transactions just like in everyday life, then tell them about the network, and then tell them that it's distributed and everyone has a copy of it. And then, of course, they're going to have a question about identity. So you introduce the notion of pseudonymity, or he doesn't use these terms, he uses much nicer terms. And then he starts going into like how this is all created. This is only 5 minutes long, this whole tutorial, but the feedback that I've got from people is they really like it. It's only 5 minutes long, so it doesn't take them, they can see that it's going to be 5 minutes ahead of time, so they can make that calculation in their head like, okay, this isn't going to take too long. And then what they do is they go back and watch it again. And anything they didn't understand the first time, they watch it again and they go, oh, I see, it's like that, and that's clever. And they start to build it, like Piaget is saying, they start to construct it into what they already know. And one of the powerful things he does is he makes it clear right from the start that the order of events is important. Because what frauds will do, and what banks have done before, he shows here with the checkbook, is that if you spend that money before the other guy does, it may as well be yours. And it's the same thing in offline. Remember that the task was, how do we digitize this? How do we get this into the digital realm? The problem, Satoshi said, is that we still have the double spending problem because the banks aren't interested in rebuilding their technology from the ground up. All they did was digitize the fraud. Right? So they took the banking system en masse, and of course they still wanted the fraud, and they still wanted to be able to double spend and go back and erase things on the ledger without other people knowing. So they digitized all the bad stuff along with the good stuff. And Satoshi's like, well, hang on, this isn't what history teaches us. What history teaches us is that, you know, like Facebook, you go off and you digitize the yearbook, and like MySpace, you can go off and you can digitize the mixtape. And it's not about bringing everything from the past into the future en masse. It's about re-examining the past, pulling it apart and saying, right, which bits do we want to carry forward into the future and which bits do we want to leave behind? Which bits were incidental? Like it was incidental that the double entry bookkeeping system was only controlled by a few people and therefore could be manipulated. That's not the kind of feature that you want to be importing into the future, right? That was actually a bug, not a feature. So what he said is, okay, let's think about this afresh. How do we get this thing to translate digitally, given that when we're digital, we've got infinite replicability? And the way he said is sequence. The sequence of events is important, because once I've given this to you, it's necessarily true that I can't give it to someone else. In that case, Satoshi says, then what you need is with every time someone exchanges, every time someone makes a claim to say, I've given this to a John, that has to be stored in the unit of value itself. That has to be notarized, so that when I try to spend it again, I have to prove that I received it beforehand. And that was the genius that's how you got the single history. And that's what Scott does so well in his presentation, is that he takes you...
No, show notes.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm going to do a whole show on this. I mean, I'm really kind of, I suppose I'm taking advantage of your show into trying fleshing it out in terms of feedback.
Oh, that's fine.
But this is why I think Scott's video needs to get more views, because what a lot of people will do is they won't include stuff like this, TXN and all this stuff. And do you know what will happen to most people when they watch this if they're not technical and they don't understand how this works? What they'll do is they'll just look at that like it's artwork. They won't get scared off by it. They'll just look at it, as long as the time sacrifice they're making isn't like an hour, 20 minutes. If it's 5-minute video, what will happen is they'll gloss over that. Their mind will kind of switch off, or maybe they'll pay more attention to the audio. But then all of a sudden, when he goes into voting, when he uses this analogy for voting, all of a sudden their mind will engage again. And they'll go, oh yeah, I know what voting is. Oh, I see. So you're kind of voting with your electricity, and that's like a sacrifice that you're making, so you wouldn't just, you now think that these things are valuable. Oh, okay, I get it. And then it forces it into a certain sequence that you can't undo. Oh, okay. So this is actually the nature of human psychology. This is actually how people learn in real life. So you shouldn't be afraid of giving people some technical stuff, because what will happen is you'll have them as a long-term student then. They'll be more curious to come back. They'll share your enthusiasm. That's one of the things you've got to do when you teach, is you've got to convey how interesting this is and how powerful this could be. And once people start to see that you find it interesting, like we say with the lolcats and all the memes on the internet, they will find it interesting too. But that's where you've got to give a good start is half the way there, and if you can just get them over that hurdle, then they start to move on their own esteem.
Well, that's why the Dogecoin was, or the Dogecoin dog was so popular. It was something that people thought was cute and wanted to
Yeah.
be a part of it.
Yeah, because they thought other people would, and it's a similar
Yeah,
thing with pink coin. Is that oh well, if women are going to get into it, then usually when women start getting into technology, it's usually because it's become more accepted. Apparently, that's the stereotype, and so then the thing is, it's got to have substance behind it. It can't just be, the dog and nothing else. There's got to be more to it.
yeah. It's powerful though, the psychology of people thinking that they got to get into it because otherwise they're going to miss the boat because other people are going to be into it. And it's, I don't know, that's a weird phenomenon too, that it's not the actual thing that they want to be involved in, it's the group that they want to be involved in. Um, yeah, we're going on
We're
2
nearly at
hours
the
here.
2 hour. We're nearly at the 2 hour mark. So really, I mean,
Yeah,
the goal for today was just to kind of loosen up and give, I find what helps with these shows is if you just relax and just kind of get into the flow. But I think it's a great idea, Jamie. Like this idea of having a slot every Tuesday afternoons where anyone can just go on and practice and try things out is a great idea.
Yeah, and I can be here to just sit around, and if somebody else has an idea that wants to just take up the show and talk, I can just sit here and chime in if I have something to say or sit here and listen. I'll be more than happy to do that and provide a platform for people to come on and say their piece. And anybody else that wants to join us, I I want to enable people to have a platform to come and learn how to be a broadcaster and have a support team that's here to help them with the things they need to get started so they don't
That's
have
brilliant.
to just jump into it cold turkey.
Exactly. That's a very good
Because
idea.
it's just that's the hardest part of starting a show, and some people are very good at it, but other people have a very difficult time, and it's very stressful to do it all on your own. So, if you are out there watching this, or you know somebody that wants to start a show or has a show idea, it doesn't have to be a 2 hour show. It, if they just have an idea that maybe it's 10 minutes long or they don't know how long it is. It doesn't matter. They can come on and we can talk about it. Or, if they want to just come on and talk to us about it or talk to me about it. I don't know if Chris will be available every week.
Yeah,
I
I'll
might
try
not
and
be
be.
here.
Yeah, I mean, if we know that there's a time slot, let's say on Tuesdays at this time, then Tom and I can make sure that we're sort of around, or at least one person's around, and then we can
Yeah,
set up the show.
yeah, and I'll try to be here every week. Um, I wanted the show not to have anybody's name attached to it. So it's not anybody's personal show. It's kind of a community show, and it's for everybody. So, do you have anything else to say, John?
yeah. I mean, I feel better. I think it's just getting used to hearing your own voice and seeing yourself on screen and stuff. Most people aren't used to it. Now, for me, it's the looser network. No format means it's a little bit easier just to jump in and jump out. Whereas if there's a row of guests on the show, it's you try to listen to all the content going on. So I think just getting used to chatting and stuff is a good idea for a show, and I would encourage other people to try and come on and get used to speaking on the mics, get their sound set up and stuff.
Yeah, and one thing too that I've found by kind of, if you're running a show, is if you have a lot of guests on, it helps if if somebody hasn't said something in a while, is to, ask them if they've been sitting there quiet. Because Chris said it the other day, a lot of times that person is probably the one that has the most wise thing to say because they haven't said anything in a long time and they've been thinking about it.
Okay.
And
Now, you mentioned in your show notes about Charlie Shrem.
yeah, and Charlie Shrem had a plea deal with his case, and apparently they're going to let him go free, but that's about the extent of what I know about it. I was hoping Chris would know about it, but he had to leave right away, so I don't think I can say any more about it. Do you know any more information?
No, I mean, for me, then, okay, we're helping prisoners or doing stuff at court. What you got to think about is damage limitation. The chances are he's not going in there to win. So, uh, it's not about cutting these losses or throwing the towel in. I believe the charges are quite serious. I believe he could have been looking at up to 30 years in jail. That kind of focuses the mind. So, if damage limitation means that he cops for some deal and looks at a 1 or 2 year sentence, then most people could probably do 1 or 2 years in a jail. 30 years is a tough shift. I don't know enough about the case. I would just say to other people, don't judge him. It's damage limitation at this point. Yeah. So I haven't really looked into what was involved in the case either. But every person has got to make their own choice, and it's his freedom that's on the line. So it's not like there's 4 people, and if one of them throws in the towel, all of them are affected. So I think if it's just him, he should just do what he feels is best for himself. He
Yeah,
won't
and
help
I,
time in.
I guess if I was looking at 30 years in prison or whatever it was, and I had the opportunity to walk away and say, okay, I'll plead guilty to that and pay a fine or whatever, I guess
Damage
I would
damage
probably,
limitation, and I think
yeah,
that's the position he's in.
I think most people would probably um, say, okay, yeah, I'm not going to do this just out of principle to spend 30 years in prison.
No. Chris is back.
Okay.
Chris may have some more to
Do
say.
Are
you
you
have anything to
talking?
comment on that? And we'll wrap it up, Chris.
Yeah, just that I think it's great that he's managed to secure himself a negotiation. I don't think it's absolutely concrete yet because the article actually says that he hopes to be, um, hopes to be freed. But it sounds like he's gone for a plea bargain. And actually, for me, that just kind of highlights how weak the case against him must have been. And it's probably just something that the authorities wanted to do to kind of scare people off so that they didn't start taking any risks. They want to, like at an airport with airport security, it's there to raise the risk for the terrorists so that they don't try any kind of funny business. So I think it was the same kind of tactics that we were seeing that law enforcement uses elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree. It's a chilling effect that they're trying to create, and you know, it's kind of scary when you have both Charlie and Ross with these charges. So you have to be careful about this stuff, and I don't advise anybody go out and defiantly stand in the face of the government just to prove a point because you probably are going to lose, but
Yeah, they've got
no
a lot
matter,
more power. They've got a lot more. They have an intensity of power. They've already got the funding. They've already got the machine guns, and so yeah, you're not going to stand up to much. I don't think Charlie Shrem actually anticipated that, though. I think when he first started it, he just thought he was an entrepreneur and he was just trying to do everything the right way. But what he didn't realize was that he was a bit too successful, a bit too quickly, and the government turned around and said, oh, well, you didn't actually have the right license. He thought he was doing the right thing. He was keeping records of everything, but they ended up using that against him.
We
So what
didn't
were
know
the
they were going to
findings?
move the goalposts.
Yeah, they moved through. That's what regulators do. That no one can predict the future. But when you come along and you say, right, you've all got to play by these rules, and then they end up saying, well, actually, we reserve the right, like the software license agreements that you end up signing with Facebook. They can change the rules anytime they like, and so fundamentally, that's not justice.
Actually, it's not an agreement, because an agreement would take 2 signatures. It's an authorization.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Oh, but they say it's an
Yeah,
agreement.
right.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's wrap this up. And I want to thank Chris and John for joining me. And, well, if you have anything that you want to be on next week, you can contact me through Twitter at JamieNelson1 or contact Chris at Mr. Chris Ellis on Twitter. And we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.